World War I, also known as the Great War, was one of the most transformative events in modern history. It was a conflict of unprecedented scale and devastation that erupted in 1914 and lasted until 1918, fundamentally altering the political, social, and economic fabric of the world. The war was marked by the clash of empires, the mobilization of entire populations, and the introduction of new technologies that reshaped the nature of warfare. At its core, World War I was not merely a series of battles, but a seismic event that redrew borders, toppled monarchies, and laid the groundwork for the 20th century's most significant geopolitical shifts. The roots of World War I lay in a complex web of alliances, militarism, imperialism, and nationalism that had been building throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The major European powers, Britain, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia, had developed extensive colonial empires and were in fierce competition for global dominance. The arms race, particularly between Germany and Britain, had created a volatile environment in which military preparedness was prioritized over diplomacy. Nationalistic fervor further inflamed tensions as various ethnic groups within multi-ethnic empires such as Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire sought independence. The immediate trigger for the war was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, by a Bosnian Serb nationalist in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. This event set off a chain reaction of ultimatums and mobilizations. Austria-Hungary, with the backing of Germany, declared war on Serbia. Russia mobilized in defense of Serbia, prompting Germany to declare war on Russia. France, bound by its alliance with Russia, entered the fray, and when German forces violated Belgium's neutrality to invade France, Britain joined the war. Thus, the localized conflict in the Balkans quickly escalated into a full-scale global war, with the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria, pitted against the Allied powers, Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Japan, and later the United States. The intricate network of alliances meant that a spark in one corner of Europe quickly became a blaze engulfing the entire continent. Compounding this was the sense of inevitability. Many leaders believed that war was the only solution to address long-standing grievances and rivalries. This widespread belief in the necessity of conflict contributed to a breakdown in diplomacy, as nations felt compelled to act decisively and preemptively. World War I introduced a new level of industrialized warfare, characterized by trench combat, mass mobilization, and the deployment of devastating technologies. The Western Front, stretching from the North Sea to the Swiss border, became synonymous with the horrors of trench warfare. Soldiers on both sides endured grueling conditions, including muddy trenches, rampant disease, and relentless artillery bombardments. The introduction of machine guns, barbed wire, and poison gas made the battlefield a deadly and dehumanizing environment. Trench warfare created a static form of conflict where gaining even a few meters of ground often came at an enormous cost in lives. The Battle of the Somme, for example, resulted in over 1 million casualties for minimal territorial gains. These battles reflected a grim reality. Military strategies had not yet adapted to the technological advancements of the industrial age. Generals, accustomed to wars of maneuver, struggled to adjust to the new demands of a conflict dominated by firepower and defensive fortifications. In the skies, the war saw the first use of airplanes in combat, initially for reconnaissance and later for aerial dogfights and bombing raids. Innovations in aviation technology progressed rapidly, with early wooden biplanes giving way to more advanced aircraft by the war's end. Pilots, often referred to as Knights of the Sky, became celebrated figures despite the high mortality rate in aerial combat. At sea, the introduction of U-boats by Germany revolutionized naval warfare, leading to devastating losses for Allied shipping. The unrestricted submarine warfare policy adopted by Germany played a critical role in drawing the United States into the war. Meanwhile, the British Royal Navy maintained a blockade that severely restricted supplies to the Central Powers, contributing to widespread starvation and economic collapse in Germany. The home front became as crucial as the battlefield, with nations mobilizing their economies and populations for total war. Governments implemented conscription, rationing, and propaganda campaigns to sustain the war effort. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking on roles traditionally reserved for men. This societal shift not only contributed to the war effort, but also laid the groundwork for future movements for gender equality. Propaganda was used extensively to maintain morale and justify the enormous sacrifices being demanded of ordinary citizens. Posters, films, and public speeches emphasized themes of patriotism, duty, and the demonization of the enemy. Although centered in Europe, World War I was truly a global conflict. Colonial troops from Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean played significant roles, often fighting in brutal conditions far from their homelands. The British and French empires in particular relied heavily on their colonies for manpower and resources. Indian soldiers fought on the Western Front and in the Middle East, while African troops were deployed in campaigns across Africa and Europe. Japan, an emerging power, joined the Allies and seized German territories in the Pacific. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire aligned with the Central Powers, opening new fronts in the Middle East and the Caucasus. The Arab Revolt, supported by British figures like T.E. Lawrence, challenged Ottoman control in the region, further complicating the geopolitical landscape. The involvement of colonies and non-European powers highlighted the war's global dimension. For many colonial subjects, participation in the war was seen as a path to greater recognition and autonomy. However, their contributions were often overlooked or undervalued in the post-war settlements, leading to disillusionment and growing demands for independence in the decades that followed. The United States entered the war in 1917, tipping the balance in favor of the Allies. Initially neutral, the U.S. was drawn into the conflict by German unrestricted submarine warfare and the interception of the Zimmermann telegram, in which Germany proposed a military alliance with Mexico against the United States. American troops, known as the Doughboys, provided a much-needed boost to the beleaguered Allied forces, both in terms of manpower and resources. The entry of the United States also marked a turning point in the war's narrative, as it reinforced the perception of the Allies as defenders of democracy and self-determination. By 1918, the Central Powers were exhausted, both militarily and economically. The collapse of the Russian Empire in 1917, following the Bolshevik Revolution, temporarily eased pressure on Germany, but the influx of American forces and resources proved decisive. The 100 Days Offensive, launched by the Allies in the summer of 1918, broke through German defenses and forced a retreat. On November 11, 1918, an armistice was signed, bringing an end to the fighting. The aftermath of the war was codified in the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. The treaty imposed harsh penalties on Germany, including significant territorial losses, disarmament, and reparations payments. While the treaty aimed to prevent future conflicts, it sowed the seeds of resentment and economic hardship in Germany, contributing to the rise of Adolf Hitler and the outbreak of World War II. The territorial adjustments also created new challenges. The dissolution of empires such as Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire led to the creation of new states in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Many of these new nations were ethnically and politically diverse, leading to tensions that would persist throughout the 20th century. The division of the Ottoman Empire's territories, in particular, created a legacy of conflict in the Middle East that continues to this day. World War I reshaped the global order in profound ways. The Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, German, and Russian empires all collapsed. leading to the creation of new nations in Europe and the Middle East. The war also marked the beginning of the end for European colonial dominance, as colonies began to demand greater autonomy and independence. The League of Nations, established as part of the Treaty of Versailles, was an early attempt to create a framework for international diplomacy and conflict resolution. Although the League ultimately failed to prevent World War II, it laid the groundwork for the United Nations. The social impact of the war was equally significant. The trauma experienced by soldiers and civilians alike gave rise to a generation of disillusionment, encapsulated in the literature and art of the 1920s. The war also accelerated technological and medical advancements, from the development of tanks and airplanes to innovations in surgery and prosthetics. The psychological toll of the war was profound, with many soldiers suffering from what was then termed shell shock, now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Economically, the war devastated Europe, leading to widespread poverty and unemployment. The United States emerged as a global economic power. The economic turmoil in post-war Europe, particularly in Germany, created fertile ground for political extremism, setting the stage for the tumultuous decades that followed. World War I was a cataclysmic event that reshaped the world in ways that are still felt today. World War I was a cataclysmic event that reshaped the world in ways that are still felt today. It was a war of empires and ideologies, of technological innovation and human suffering. While it ended with hopes of lasting peace, it instead laid the groundwork for further conflict and upheaval. Understanding the complexities of World War I is essential to grasping the history of the 20th century and the enduring challenges of our modern world.